Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr Erum and I'm the LEGO Professor of Play here at the University of Cambridge. And I direct with colleagues the Centre for Research on Play in Education, Development and Learning, or PEDAL for short, centre focused on research on play and putting children at the centre of the choices we make as families, as schools, and as a society. I'm delighted to welcome you to the David Whitebread Annual Lecture. Each year, this lecture is delivered by a leading practitioner or researcher in the fields of study that David cared passionately about: young children's learning, their cognitive and social development, and play. We've been fortunate to have hosted wonderful experts to inspire us with these lectures, and this year's no different, as we welcome Dr Erum Mariam. But more of Dr Erum in a moment. The annual lecture is in memory of our colleague, Dr David Whitebread, who taught at the Faculty of Education for many years. David inspired generations of teachers and researchers, particularly those working in the early years. His great influence continues through their work and through the children that they have taught and continue to teach. David was also a staunch advocate for play, recognising its central importance in children's lives and the difference that opportunities for play can make to enhance children's lives now, the fun and the excitement, but also their learning and development. It's really fitting that the David Whitebread Annual Lecture is held this year on the first International Day of Play. David's work also led to conversations with the LEGO Foundation, and through that, the establishment of the PEDAL Research Centre, where we work here. At PEDAL, we conduct research, train others, and seek to influence policy and practice to better understand play and to put children and children's perspectives at the centre of the choices that are made for them and about them. We're on a policy programme called Mobilise, and our research projects include studies of interventions to support children's behaviour and reading, projects to better understand the play of children with autism, and to support the practice of teachers and early years practitioners in areas like maths and literacy education and children's socio-emotional development. In short, trying our best to use our skills and knowledge and our partnerships to make a real difference to children's lives. You can find out more on our website, pedalhub.net. As part of that work, we're also fortunate to work with fantastic colleagues across the UK and around the world, including our annual lecturer this year, Dr Erum Mariam. Erum is the Executive Director of BRAC Institute of Educational Development at BRAC University in Bangladesh. Erum completed her PhD in education from Cambridge University in 2008. She has extensive experience in scaling up educational interventions, both nationally and globally, and played a role in the expansion of the unique BRAC-run non-formal primary schools in the 1990s. Under Erum's leadership, BRAC have developed the globally recognised play labs and humanitarian play labs, focusing on early stimulation, children's well-being and parental engagement. These have been transformed into green play labs and green humanitarian play labs, integrating climate change adaptation with early childhood development and mental health, critical in Bangladesh, but in many other places as well. Erum will deliver the lecture, and then there will be a panel discussion, also including other wonderful panelists that my colleague Sally Hogg will introduce in due course. If you have any questions during the talk and afterwards in the panel discussion, please put them into the Q&A where they can pick those up. But first, it's my great honour to welcome Erum to deliver the David Whitebread Annual Lecture. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Erum Mariam. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Education Development under BRAC University in Bangladesh. It's really an honor for me to be able to speak to you today. So I went into Homerton College in June 2004, and I knew that I was enrolling for the PhD program in October. And the first person that I met in Homerton was David. Later on in October, David and Pam and Madeline Arnott had arranged for the orientation for the education research course students. And I really enjoyed that. And so later, I started attending David's classes in addition to the address classes. I completed my PhD in 2008, and then in 2016, I met David in Billund. David came twice to Bangladesh, and you can see a few images here showing that. And we were really honored to have David in Bangladesh. When I met David in Billund in 2016, I mean, it was so exciting for me to be able to meet the guru who had really, taught us so much about play and about child development. So when we connected, I requested David that, David has to come and work with us. Then David started working with us. But I just want to mention again that it is really an honor for me to be able to have this discussion with you in memory of David Whitebread. I just could not have thought of a more appropriate session to speak about play in Bangladesh, Uganda, and Tanzania. So while I was studying in Cambridge, my supervisor, Professor Robin Alexander, he insisted that I speak to two people. One was Dr. Edith Esch, and the other was Mary Jane Drummond. So Dr. Edith Esch and my supervisor, Professor Robin Alexander, both had influenced me to really look deeply into cultures. And Mary Jane Drummond, she influenced me to look deeply into play. And in my PhD research, I had looked into play and cultures and also well-being. So fast forward, in 2016, Lego Foundation came on board to support us to define play and to work on play for children in Bangladesh, Uganda, and Tanzania. And this was for children who were 3 to 5 years of age. The process took us a little time, but what we did was we went deeply into communities, and we wanted to find out, what does play mean to, the Bangladeshi community? What did play mean to the Ugandan community? And what did play mean to the Tanzanian community? So we had a lot of consultations with the communities, and we did a lot of observation about play in those communities. What did children play in Bangladesh? What did children do in Uganda? And what did children do in Tanzania? Then, based on what we saw, based on what we heard, based on what the community told us, based on what, the consultations, we developed the play labs. We developed the play labs in Bangladesh and in Uganda and in Tanzania. And David always said that one of the core elements of the play lab was the play leaders. The play leaders were absolutely amazing. And we took women from the community and we trained them on play. And, they were the play leaders. They made the magic happen in the play labs. And the children absolutely loved it. And, David continued to tell us that, the play leaders are absolutely instrumental for play labs. You will see a few pictures now. And, you will see the pictures with the play labs and the play leaders and the children. And, the first is from Bangladesh. And then you see the image from Uganda. And then you see the image from Tanzania. And in all these three contexts, the play labs are very contextualized and beautiful. So then, in 2017, something happened in Bangladesh. There were more than 700,000 Rohingya refugees who traveled and crossed the border and came into Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And, there were a lot of children who were in the early years age group. And, of course, we wanted to do the play labs for them. But we knew that, the play labs had to be contextualized. And so we again started working with the children and the community in order to contextualize the play lab. So we collected a lot of the rhymes, which were kavyas. We collected their stories, which are kissas. We collected their physical play. We collected their art. And we collected a lot of the physical play. So we observed, and again we consulted with the community, and we were collecting. And so one day what happened was I was in the camp, and the children were saying their kavya, And the children were in a circle, and there was a child in front, and she was saying the Kabbya, and she was chanting, and the other children, they were following her, and they were also saying the Kabbya, and they were chanting. But what was very interesting was the community was coming forward. And I saw that there were mothers and aunts and grandparents and uncles and older siblings. They were all coming very near to this Humanitarian Play Lab, and they were standing, and they were, they looked that, they were feeling kind of very happy about it. And while the children said their Kabbya and chanted, the community who were coming forward, they seemed to be really enjoying it. And that night I called a friend, a psychologist, clinical psychologist friend, and I said, Nargis, this is what happened in the camp today. And she said, Irmapa, don't you realize what happened? It's that, this play that the children were doing, that was not only healing for the children, but that was also healing for the community. And they were all healing as part of the chanting and the play. So now we'll see a few of the images of the Humanitarian Play Lab. And this Humanitarian Play Lab that we developed, one of the core elements here was that we must be able to provide children with a sense of belongingness, because children have come from their own homes, they have lost their homes, and they feel uprooted. And so we have to be able to provide this sense of belongingness through everything that they are familiar with, through their cultures. And we also started, as I said earlier, we collected all the rhymes and stories and art, but we also worked a lot on the designs. So now you will see a few images of the Humanitarian Play Labs. Again, we have the play leaders from the same community, and children are doing a lot of play from their own cultures. And here you also see the design and the decoration of the Humanitarian Play Labs. What we did in the Humanitarian Play Labs is that we also integrated psychosocial support, and all the play leaders were trained in psychosocial support, but there was also an additional para-counselor who was providing support to the children and who was working closely with the play leader in order to provide psychosocial support to all the children and the families. So in this model, what happened is we not only worked on learning through play, but we also worked on healing through play. And when we were doing the play labs, we worked a lot on learning through play, and we defined play. And when we did this Humanitarian Play Lab model, we worked a lot on integration of learning and healing through play. So one interesting thing what happened was, once we developed the model for Cox's Bazar, our colleagues who were in BRAC International, they also, they were very curious. So when we were asked, when BRAC International was asked to, do ECD projects in the Rhino camp in Uganda, my colleagues took the model of the Humanitarian Play Lab and contextualized it and, did it in the Rhino camps of Uganda. And, there also, it was very, very important to have the learning through play as well as healing through play and work through cultures. So my colleagues did that. And so now we can see a few images of the Humanitarian Play Labs in the Rhino camp in Uganda. You might want to know that, it's really great that, we started with this whole play movement in Bangladesh with the play labs. And, we defined play for Bangladesh, and we did this, extended this to Uganda, and we defined play for Uganda, and, we defined play for Tanzania. And in all these contexts, it was about Tanzanian play. And in Uganda, it was about Ugandan play. And in Bangladesh, it was about Bangladeshi play. And that's fantastic. But then, what about the government? I mean, did we work with the government? And we did. So what happened was that, after the initial, work in the community, In all three countries, we took the play labs to the government setting and we co-located it in the government setting. And here, Uganda was far ahead. Uganda started the play labs in the government setting. And there was a particular space for the children who were 3 to 5, and these were co-located in the government school. And we followed. So, Bangladesh and Tanzania also followed. We started, setting up the play labs in the government schools, and, there were, spaces there allocated by the government, and, we had the play labs run during the time that the school was running. And, the government, in all three contexts, the government head teachers and the administration, they were included, they were onboarded, they very much felt a part of it. But there was also other linkages, and that is that in Tanzania, the government of Tanzania, they absolutely accepted and adopted the play lab curriculum for 0 to 5s. In Bangladesh, what happened was we were asked to help and support the development of curriculum for children who were 4 to 6. And so my colleagues who were instrumental in the play lab model, they went and they worked with the government in order to design and develop curriculum for children who were 4 to 6. And everything that we were doing in Bangladesh in the play lab model and in the Humanitarian play lab model, my colleagues, they took that and they incorporated that into the government curriculum. And so, defining play and looking at play and, the sort of working closely with the communities and, engaging children and looking at all these different aspects of, learning and looking at child development outcomes, looking at children's motor development, looking at children's cognitive development, looking at language development, looking at socio-emotional development. All of these ideas were very closely discussed with the government. And, there was a series of workshops and there were months of, detailed discussions and meetings and, curriculum development and designing and, illustration. And there were also detailed discussion around, play and indoor play and outdoor play, etc. And so finally, the government of Bangladesh then developed the play-based curriculum for children aged 4 to 6. And in Uganda also, the government was very, very supportive of the play labs that we were setting up, and they were very, very supportive of the pedagogy, that we had developed. So in all three contexts, we really worked very closely with the government and we absolutely achieved milestones. Another question that you might have was that, what about measurements? And this is where, David was so instrumental, and David was absolutely core here. One thing is that, in the whole play lab journey, we had a group of play consortium advisors, and, David was very much an advisor there. And, David was kind of recommending to us about, frameworks, etc., but very, very closely working with us in Bangladesh, Uganda, and in Tanzania about developing our capacity on measurements. So what David did was, David helped us to develop our own measurement on playfulness. And David also helped us to develop measures around self-regulation of children. And David helped us to validate the measures like child. So these measures we developed for Bangladesh, Uganda, and Tanzania. In addition to that, David also helped us, to look very closely into fidelities and, what should be the fidelity measures and, how can we really look at impact. And so, with those fidelity measures, we incorporated that into monitoring and we looked at, these sort of child development outcomes through these fidelity measures in all three contexts. So these were the measures that were very, very important for the Play Lab and for us to be able to understand the impact of play. So we are, very, very grateful to David Whitebread for everything that he did for us, for really inspiring us to look so deeply into play, but also for developing our capacity to be able to measure the impact of play. David also encouraged us to look at play leaders, and we've done a lot of work looking at the competencies and the skills of play leaders. But what was very important and what was very interesting in the research that was coming out of this play and Play Lab movement was in the Play Lab, it showed that children who were lagging behind, after a year, they absolutely level up with their peers. So it showed that play is a really incredible equalizer. And what it did was, it was absolutely a great approach for equity. In the Rohingya camp, for the Humanitarian Play Labs, what happened was we found that, through the measures, we found that children consistently improve around all child development outcomes, including socio-emotional development outcomes. So in the Humanitarian Play Labs, we found that children improve on all the child development outcomes, including socio-emotional development outcomes and including their cultural identities. So this is also something that David has stressed on, and we started looking very deeply into all child development outcomes, including socio-emotional development outcomes and including children's cultural identities. So these have been very, very important measures for us, for looking into the impact of play. So most recently, what happened is we again collaborated with PEDAL, and we started looking into climate vulnerable communities in Bangladesh, and we started looking into the meaning of play for children in the climate vulnerable communities of Bangladesh. And we took 4 locations, and we've been working very closely with the PEDAL team, and we've selected 4 locations where we are looking at what children do, what is the kind of play they do, and what is it that they say. And so we observe and we speak to them, and we find here once again that play is also the language for children. That many times adults we forget that children have their own language, and that language is around play. And in this research, what we are finding is that play gives children a voice. Many times what happens for adult researchers, that when we go to speak to children, we expect children to be able to speak in terms of adult language. And we expect children to be able to interact and to express in terms of what adults think and how we, how we think that, it should be spoken, it should be communicated, it should be articulated. But through this research, we found that children's language is on play. And when we go to observe, and when we become a part of that play, and when we speak to the children, then children speak from the lens of play. Children speak from their experience of play, and that is actually their language. And so, the insight that we have from these climate vulnerable communities is that, there is deprivation, and there is a lot of hardship. And of course, there is so much of resilience because the community is dealing with this climate vulnerability day after day. But within this context, we find that children play. And within this context, we find that children are able to express the meaning of play. And therefore, again, we find that play is not only a tool for learning, and play is not only a tool for healing, but play is also children's language, and play gives children a voice. So we have a few images from this research that you will see now. So these images that you see, these are absolutely beautiful images of children, really playing in this setting. So you might want to know that what do we advocate for? So we worked on play. We've been working on play, and we work on we work with the communities. We work on the curriculum development. We work on developing play leaders' competencies. We are working on co-creating the models with the communities, and we are integrating mental health, and we are kind of developing measures to be able to, of course, see the impact of play, and and then of course we are also working with the government. But then you might ask that, well, what is it that you guys really advocate for? So we advocate for three things. First, we advocate for that play is a tool for learning, and all our research shows that play has an impact on child development, including socio-emotional development. Second, we advocate that play is also a tool for healing, and all our research data shows that children improve in socio-emotional development. And then we advocate for that play is a tool for children's voice. And this research that we are doing, this absolutely shows that play is children's language. So these are the three things that we advocate for: that play is a tool for learning, play is a tool for healing, and play is a tool for children's voices. I'm almost towards the end of the session, and you might be curious to know that what is the future of this play movement. So one thing is that play is going to be the pedagogy for the next couple of decades. Definitely play is going to be the pedagogy for the next few decades. And here, the first thing is, we have seen from our work that the play framework is an essential one for addressing equity and vulnerability. So, whether we have worked in the poorest households, or whether we have worked in the conflict setting, or whether we have worked in the climate vulnerable, areas, wherever we have worked, we have found where there is poverty, where there's crisis and conflict and vulnerability, play is the best approach. Play is the best approach for addressing children's development. And here we think that it is going to be, for the next couple of decades, that it will be the play framework, the play pedagogy that is going to be dominating the whole learning, agenda. And it is very, very important, and it is very important that we keep this momentum on play, because like I said, that where there is the poverty, or whether there is climate vulnerability, whether there is crisis and conflict, the best approach is play. But what we find is that play is also the best for childcare. And for childcare, for childcare and for, looking into child development of, families that are, struggling, with livelihoods, and, where sort of mothers are, sort of obviously have to go for livelihoods, and fathers have to go for their livelihoods, and, for the care economy and childcare, play is also the best approach. So the first point is, the future of play is going to be definitely instrumental for addressing all of these equity and vulnerability, and how best we can achieve child development in spite of vulnerability, and how best we can achieve child development outcomes for equity. So this is going to be the one. The second is that, we have been doing a lot of play for children who are in their early years as well as for early primary. And we've seen it absolutely works, and I've been talking about that. But what about older children? And what about older children who are in primary? And what about children who are in adolescent? They also love it. So the second big thing that we have to be working on, and where the future is going to be designing all these play for children who are older, and for children who are older in primary grades and children who are adolescent. We've been working with children who are adolescents, and we've been working with adolescents, and we find that adolescents also absolutely love play, and adolescents absolutely love play, and that play again gives them so much of self-esteem and so much of courage, and that engagement is so inspiring for them. And so this is a model that we've been sort of testing, and we haven't taken it to scale, but we see the same thing that we saw in early years, that it's so engaging, and it's so again, it's about learning, but it's also so empowering, and it's also about self-esteem and courage. And so this is going to be in play. The future of play will also be for older children and adolescents. And the third is that play, of course, there's going to be a lot of investment around measures. We have to be able to measure the impact of play. We have to be able to measure the impact of play. And so, we'll continue everything that we've been doing, and we look at tools, how best to get the impact of play. And so we'll continue with this, but there's also something else, that there's also a lot of work that we need to do, that we have to do in future, in terms of how best we can understand children's perspectives. And the best way we can understand children's perspectives is by understanding their play, is by understanding their language of their play, is by understanding their expression of their play. So there's a lot of opportunities there for us to develop as children's researchers by really taking play as the language for understanding children's perspectives. So to wrap it up, what I have said is that the future looks very bright for this movement. The future will be that play will be absolutely at center stage for education, for early years, and for children in primary, for any kind of setting where there is conflict, there is crisis, there is climate vulnerability. So it is about addressing children's vulnerability, and the best approach for equity is play. And I have added that we find that play is also the best approach for childcare and for looking into the challenges and vulnerabilities of families in care economy. The second point is we have to be able to do play for the older children and for adolescents. So, there's this age thing, we just have to be able to do that. And the third very important future of play is, Of course, we have to be able to keep on investing on measures to see the impact of play, but we have to invest in understanding children's perspectives and in understanding children's perspectives through their language of play. So once again, thank you very much for having me here and for giving me this opportunity to be able to share my experience around the play movement, and what an honor it is to be able to speak in this David Whitebread Memorial Lecture. I thank you. I thank the PEDAL team, University of Cambridge, for giving me this opportunity and for giving me this opportunity to share my experience. It is truly an honor. Thank you.
Erum, thank you very much for an absolutely wonderful lecture. So much to think about there, and absolutely lovely pictures to bring it all to life for us as well. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sally Hogg and I'm the Policy Fellow at PEDAL, and I'm going to be chairing the next part of this event, which is a panel discussion and a question and answers with Erum, but with also our wider panelists. I've got a few questions just to kick us off, and then we'd really like to hear questions from attendees as well. So please put your questions into the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll get to those. I'd like to just start by introducing the panel. Obviously, Erum needs no introduction. We're also joined by my colleague Stephen Bailey, who's the Senior Research Associate at PEDAL, has been involved in some of that work with that Erum was talking about around children's voices in Bangladesh. Zoe Dib is the leads programme in quality and impact at Right to Play. And we also should be joined imminently by Ben Perks from UNICEF, who is running an event in New York today, but should be joining us any second. So he will fit seamlessly into the panel when he arrives. Just to start, I wondered, Stephen and Zoe, if you could just introduce yourselves by saying a little bit about what you do to support children's play.
Sure, thanks, Sal. Stephen, I'm going to go first if that's all right. Thanks so much, Erum. That was brilliant and so thoughtful, and has given us loads to think about in terms of our programming. As Sal said, I'm Vice President of Impact and Quality at Right to Play. We are an international NGO that has been supporting children's well-being and learning through play-based programs for almost 25 years. We have programs in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Canada, and we believe and we know that play is one of the most transformative forces in a child's life. So we advocate for play and play-based learning to be integrated into local and national systems and priorities across the 14 countries that we work in. And we collaborate with stakeholders from parents, caregivers, teachers, facilitators, through education and care systems right up to national governments. And we're very delighted to be a coalition partner for the International Day of Play and here with you all today. So thanks for having us.
Thanks, Zoe. Stephen, over to you.
Great, thanks, Sally, and thanks to Erum for a really inspirational lecture. So Paul's already talked a little bit about what PEDAL does today. And within PEDAL, I really study and research the role of play within children's lives in different low-income global contexts. In particular, I'm passionate about how play supports children to become creative, flexible, and imaginative learners so that they can solve problems, overcome challenges, and build the best lives possible. And I'm also particularly honoured to be able to continue some of the work that David started with the BRAC team in Bangladesh.
Thanks, and welcome, Ben, the head of campaigns and advocacy at UNICEF. Sorry, we're dropping you straight into it as you arrived, Ben. We're just doing introductions. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what you're doing in New York for IDOP today.
Yeah, hi, great to meet everybody, and sorry for joining a moment late. I had a technical challenge. Yes, we are launching IDOP at the UN here in New York. For one of the rare moments in history, we're going to have a group of 4-year-olds doing learning through play right next to where all the delegates and ministers and ambassadors come to talk about policy related to children, and many of them are going to be visiting that installation. We're going to have a formal launch with a number of senior kind of global leaders, and also Lucy Liu, the Goodwill Ambassador, and we're then going to have a huge PlayStation on the lawn at the UN, where 6 to 9-year-olds are going to be doing just free play and enjoying an exploration. We have activations all around the world. We have, many of our 190 country offices and affiliates around the world are doing something for IDOP, and we're just really excited about it. And just to add, I lead UNICEF's global advocacy on child development and child protection, and I'm very happy to be with you on this panel today.
Thanks very much. And I think we are all both loving this event and wishing we were in your giant PlayStation at the same time. So I'm just going to ask a few questions of the panelists, which link into some of the questions that are already coming from our audience. So Erum talked in that wonderful lecture about adapting play opportunities to different cultures and contexts, and kind of bringing communities in to design them. So you've talked about how right to play work across lots of different countries. How do you notice how play differs in different cultures and contexts, and therefore how your response needs to adapt to that?
So I think we notice some differences, but we notice lots of similarities, and play is a universal language used by children all over the place. And I'm sure that people who have joined today have seen children in lots of contexts, playing football, skipping, hopscotch. I was in Ghana earlier this year, and I saw kids playing cat's cradle, which reminded me of that in playgrounds when I was growing up. And then I was in Jordan a few months ago, and I saw it again. So there are these types of play that happen across cultures, that have happened across time as well. But despite those similarities, play is obviously affected by the availability of space, by having objects to engage with, having time to play, and most importantly, the value and importance that's given by adults and kind of gatekeepers to play. That really affects how we see children and young people engage in play. If your teacher, for instance, thinks that play is a sign of idleness, we saw that in a context study in Sierra Leone last year, you're not going to be playing in their classroom. And if your mum thinks that play might lead you into getting into trouble with boys, she's more likely to want you to stay at home and do your chores, although we know you're probably going to integrate play into those chores, but rather do that than go outside and be exposed to risk. And we also see that role play and imaginative play is affected by your environment. And everyone who's got kids will see that. I've got a 3.5-year-old, and she likes to pretend to go to work with her backpack, and then she sits and pretends to be a laptop. And she's also obsessed with the idea of colleagues, because I talk about my colleagues. And weirdly, she started naming her soft toy Susan, which is the name of my boss. So she's clearly acting and doing role play that reflects what she can see in her environment. If we lived on a farm, she would be, pretending to interact with animals and picking vegetables and driving a tractor. I think finally that one of the big differences we see in our programs at Right to Play and the communities that we support is how deeply cultural and social norms affect how girls and boys can play. So boys tend to have more freedom to play outside. They rove over a bigger area unsupervised. Girls tend to play in smaller groups, closer to home, and often their play relates to kind of domestic and social activities. And as I said before, adults define what is appropriate for boys and girls to engage in, which often means that girls just have less time and less exposure to the types of play that boys are giving the freedom to take part in.
Thank you, Zoe, so much in that answer. And I was thinking about how Erum was talking about play being children's language and giving us a perspective on their life, and your anecdote about Susan, that kind of the idea that actually if we watched and observed children's play, we can understand what they're taking from the world around them and how they're making sense of it, and so much richness. And also your example of the same types of play coming up. Erum talked about play being children's language, and isn't it nice of that idea of a universal language that all children are kind of connected through as well? Stephen, I'd like to get your views on kind of the differences and similarities between play in different cultures, and particularly one of the audience, Sarah, has asked if there are significant differences between children's play in Bangladesh and in the UK, which you might have observed through working in those spaces too.
Thanks, Ali. I think, first of all, Zoe has covered a lot of the bases already, certainly highlighting the similarities across contexts, and also in particular the role of adults and parents and other caregivers within that. I think I guess maybe one thing to add around that is we know that certainly in the UK, in Europe and other parts, and for example in North America, there's been a rise in digital and online play, and so that's been something that that we know has boomed and become a massive space in terms of online gaming for children, for adolescents, and for adults too. And I think certainly from my experiences of working in Bangladesh and a bit of work in the UK too, I think that difference around online gaming is certainly something that I've noticed. Children in the UK seem to have ready and quick access to smartphones, tablets, laptops, etc., and that gives them an opportunity to engage with these online virtual worlds, and also to potentially play with people who may not be based within the locality. In terms of things that I specifically saw in Bangladesh, I think it was the children were really focused, but also very spontaneous in terms of how they played. I was amazed at seeing the children sitting down, playing with clay, playing with items, being really focused, and you could see how they were building important skills that they were going to be using in their future lives. So an example that comes to my mind is in a community called Managunj. We were walking around and we saw the children making chapati out of small balls of mud, and it was really interesting to hear about the process that they would be going through in terms of getting that practice with their motor skills, their fine motor skills, while they were young, and gradually building up to be able to use the ingredients themselves so that they could help and support the family in a more meaningful way. So I think those are some of the differences that I noticed in a couple of those contexts. Fascinating.
Thank you, Stephen. Erum, there's a question that's come up around somebody who's been inspired by your play labs, and wondering if there's kind of opportunities to scale them to other countries where you're not currently working. I know some of the audience will be working in different countries and want to know whether they can get play labs where they are.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Actually, yes, we've sort of, for play labs, we've been doing in, like I said, Bangladesh, Uganda, Tanzania, but we've also been working in Sierra Leone, and most recently also in the Philippines. So basically it's the play lab, philosophy, play lab ethos, and the way we work. And, we are very interested, to work in different countries. But of course, we understand that there's a time that is needed for contextualization. But it's also related to identifying a community there in that country. So we always work with a community in the country. So for example, in the Philippines, we worked in a particular area of Mindanao, where we work with the community and, the parents, and, we again went through the curriculum and the design of the play lab, etc. So yes, I mean, I think we'd be very interested to collaborate. And, this is really about co-creating with the community, as well as co-creating with the ECD professionals of that country. So we'll be very interested to support more and to collaborate if those opportunities emerge. Thank you.
Thanks, Erum. Ben, Zoe talked a lot in her answer about the different barriers and challenges that can exist for children around the world to be able to play. I know you're doing a lot through IDOP and much wider about tackling some of those challenges and creating a world where children's right to play is being fulfilled. Can you tell us a bit about what you think needs to happen to ensure that all children can play in the way that they want in ways that support their development?
Yeah, I think there's really three major obstacles to play in the world. The one is that we trivialize it. We don't integrate it enough into our learning systems and into our society. The second is that it has external threats, things like climate change, urbanization, eradication of play space, pollution, all of these conflicts. And thirdly, there are a group of children that are deprived of the secure base, the attachment relationship, and other really key elements of child development that are essential for being able to play. A child cannot play when they're in survival mode, and we've learned over the past 20 years that far more children than we previously thought were experiencing adverse childhood experiences, which are a risk for trauma. We've just released data today that 4 in 10 children are not getting the responsive caregiving that's required, the stimulation that's required at home, and also children affected by other forms of trauma related to conflict. And for hundreds of millions of children living in conflict zones, 160 million children involved in child labor, early marriage, all of these things. There are 3 things we can do, we can call on governments to do right now that are affordable, doable, and measurable, and will be accelerators for play, bearing in mind that play is a vital sign that children are safe, loved, and nurtured. It doesn't guarantee those things, but it's a vital indicator that those things are in place. Firstly, we need to make sure that there are universally available evidence-based parenting programs that promote attachment, that prevent violence and trauma, that are evidence to contribute to good mental health amongst parents, improve mental health outcomes amongst parents, and promote play. And this is a way we now know. There was a meta-review led by WHO last year that showed that we can now break the cycle of intergenerational trauma at scale with much better outcomes for children. So universal access to parenting programs, a fraction of the cost of the negative outcomes of child trauma throughout the life cycle. The second thing is something we probably as a world should have really achieved some time ago, which is to make sure that every child between the age of 3 and 6 has a place in preschool where they're learning through play. This is, if you think back to 50 years ago when only 20% of the world's children were vaccinated against preventable diseases, and the world made a commitment to make vaccines universal. They increased it to 80% coverage within just a decade and reduced child mortality by almost half. We should be having the same level of ambition for child development now. Every child between 3 and 6 a place in preschool. And finally, we should also be protecting play spaces. We should be expanding play spaces. We should be managing the risk to play and free play from things like safetyism, from the misuse of smartphones, and from urbanization and pollution. And you see play being squeezed out, also being squeezed out of curricula by exams and testing. We need to protect play space and play time. So those 3 things: universal access to parenting programs, universal access to preschool, and protection and promotion of play, space, and time. These are 3 things we should be insisting on that governments do right now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. Really, really clear call to action there. And there's lots in that answer that I really enjoyed. I think the stuff about the links to parenting and children feeling safe, psychologically safe, as well as physically safe, is so important. We often think about spaces, but actually recognizing that the internal world of the child affects how they're able to play as well as the external world. It's also Infant Mental Health Awareness Week this week, as well as International Day of Play. So there's a real tie together there that actually if we can support babies' mental health, which comes through having those secure, responsive relationships, then our children are better able to play. And also conversely, play is a thing that supports those relationships to develop. And I love that idea of this as a sort of vaccination, that actually just as vaccinations protected children against physical problems, actually we're sort of boosting children's health and well-being throughout their lives by getting universal access to playful learning and parenting as well. You talked about play being a sign of children being loved, that actually if children are playing, it's not only supporting their development, but it's telling us actually that their development up to this point has been kind of good, and actually children aren't playing, there's something there that they're giving us a big indication that something's not quite right for them. We talk a lot about the impact that play has in terms of children's longer term development, but actually the work around IDOP is very much also about the fact that it's not just about its long-term benefits, it's also a right for children, and it's part of a happy childhood. And I wondered if any of you wanted to reflect on how we kind of keep that space where we talk about the impact, long-term impact of play, but we also don't lose the fact that play just matters. It's joyous in its own right, and we shouldn't always just have to justify a good childhood in terms of becoming a better adult. Ben?
Yeah, I think that when you're trying to convince governments to change things at scale for children, you work with different audiences. So these are just different segmentations for different audiences. If you're speaking to people that are really passionate about play and about children, you're going to talk about how important it is in the moment. If you're talking to hard-nosed economic kind of free market thinkers, you're going to talk about the economic impact and the return on investment. If you're talking to security sector people, you're going to talk about the risk of how the absence of play, attachment, and nurture contributes to crime and risk of insecurity. You have what we have to do as a community that work on development and child development and child protection really is bring the full weight of the brain science, the economics, the arguments about the future, the arguments about the present, the child rights imperative, all together, the full weight of that, be unified on the 2 or 3 outcomes that we want to achieve immediately for children, and use that to drive our argument forward. We're so often tinkering with minutiae. We really need to be able to communicate with all audiences, including those that might not be immediately sympathetic. So that's my response.
And the brilliant thing about play is that we can draw on all of those bodies of evidence, the moral case, the economic case, the developmental case.
Yes, sorry, one other point on that. I'm really sorry, but there's also a mega trend in the world now, right? We talk about so many negative mega trends. There's a positive mega trend. For the first time in history, millions, maybe billions of parents around the world are accessing science on child development. So there's a consensus normally on what's good for children now, and that's reflected in the science that parents are accessing. And it's also a time when parents are reflecting on their own childhood, things that could have been better, and they're trying to also improve things for their own kids. We need to lean into that conversation, lean into that very public discussion. There are, I think, one app in India for parenting has 30 million subscribers. Here in the United States, there's a $46 billion industry in parenting advice. So there's something going on in the world. We need to link up what we're doing with that to make sure that progress reaches every child everywhere.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. How do we tap into parents' desire for information, but also help them just to tune into the cues that their own child is giving them about what they need, and into being present with them as well. There's been lots of interest in what you said, lots of questions coming up. I wonder if it'd be possible for you to put a link to the research that you mentioned that's out today. And I also know you've written a really brilliant blog about all of this as well. If you could put those links into the chat, that would be great for those who want to read a bit more as well. Thank you, Ben. Stephen, your comments about digital play have generated quite a lot of questions. So people have asked about sort of your reflections on the difference between digital play and other types of maybe physical or social play, and whether there's a risk in technology actually kind of reducing children's opportunities for other sorts of play. And if you had any thoughts on that.
Yes, it's a really fascinating and slightly controversial area, I guess. Certainly thinking about it from a child development point of view, there are questions around the age at which children should be using smartphones, getting onto tablets, etc. Then there are queries around security for children online. So there's a wealth of questions around how children can play online safely, and also the cognitive impact and results of those games and those interactions. I guess the point of view that I come at it from is that certainly we need children in the modern world to be developing skills so that they can keep up with technological developments. but I certainly wouldn't be advocating for that being the sole or the main component of children's play. I'm a keen advocate for children having something of a balanced diet of play. We know that there are lots of different types of play, physical with objects, games with the rules, etc. And they each offer different developmental outcomes in terms of cognitive skills, physical, fine, gross motor skills, empathy, emotional resilience, all of these different things. And so it's great. I would encourage parents, adults, caregivers, and teachers to be supporting children to play in many different ways. Digital online can be one part of that. And I think it does offer benefits in terms of, for example, problem solving and reflexes, but I certainly wouldn't be advocating for it in exclusion to other types of play. I think it's really important that children get that balance so that they have an opportunity to develop a wide range of skills. And I guess some of the challenges that we've seen in recent years, the lockdowns during the pandemic, concerns for among parents in terms of their children roaming neighborhoods, etc., have been encouraging parents or incentivizing them to keep their children in close quarters. And while I understand the reasons for that, I think there is value in supporting parents and encouraging parents to be helping their children to play in lots of different ways.
Thank you, Stephen. I love that idea of the balanced diet. I'm seeing that kind of the plate that we have with all of the different sections, but imagined for play. I really love that idea. I want to move us on to a sort of call to action that Erum made at the end of the lecture about thinking around the value of play for older children and adolescents. And you also had that lovely image of the kind of wider community healing through watching and observing and getting involved in their children's play as well. And I'd really like you to share your ideas about how we can make sure that efforts to improve play aren't just limited to younger children. And a number of our questions relate to this as well, to think about actually what can we do to support play for older primary school children, young people, and actually for kind of parents and communities as well. Zoe, do you want to kick us off with what Right to Play do that's sort of for those older age groups? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So we work, actually it's more recent we've started to work with parents and caregivers to support children aged 3 to 6. For a long time, we've worked in primary school systems to support play-based learning in the classroom. So we have quite a lot of evidence around what works to train teachers to be able to use play to facilitate learning and social and emotional skills development with children aged 6 to 12. But we also see play as a really powerful tool to support young people's developing confidence, self-efficacy, kind of leadership, negotiation skills. So in both in-school and out-of-school programs, we set up girls' clubs, which need to be rebranded because they have girls and boys in them. But play is used in those as a way to encourage members of the opposite sex to safely interact. They're supported by a trained play facilitator who can kind of scaffold learning, encourage questioning, reflection, and they're often spaces where gender and social norms are challenged by young people themselves through playful activities. We also see that play in older children and young adolescents is a way to allow them to take risks safely. So to explore like sensitive topics like sexual reproductive health that you might not be able to do at home, but with a facilitator kind of holding that space and ensuring that the playful activities are appropriate for that age group, those spaces become a really safe way to kind of tackle those risky topics really safely. And I used to work for an organisation called Theatre for a Change that used lots of theatre and role play techniques to kind of facilitate those spaces. So I've seen really amazing examples of adolescent boys and girls coming together to talk about safe sex, for instance, and coming into the room and feeling really nervous, not being able to make eye contact, and through role play and through theatre techniques, being able to look each other in the eye, and to practice saying no to unwanted sex, for instance, which becomes quite a powerful rehearsal for reality, in that you're kind of building that muscle memory and building that confidence, and even being able to use the language that you would need if you face that encounter in real life. So we're doing some interesting research at the moment in Tanzania and Burundi around how girls' clubs are working with older adolescents in playful ways, and we'll be sharing that over the next probably 6 months.
Fantastic. I think it's really interesting how actually when we start to think about adolescents and young people, play merges with creative arts and music and recreation. And so it does feel different. It's not the sort of play with toys, but it's still play. There's a wonderful charity called Right to Play in South London for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And actually they create a safe space with a lot of music and arts facilitation. And that is the way that the teenagers play and connect as well. So yeah, thinking about what does play mean when we think about other age groups as well. I don't know if any of our other panel members want to reflect on things that you have going on for older children to support their play, or young people.
I guess maybe just one thing to add there, and Zoe's already talked about the importance of girl clubs, but just for us to remember that around the world, lots of children, lots of adolescents don't make it to secondary school for reasons which can include the lack of places, the requirement to pay fees, either school fees or hidden fees through uniforms and books, and also lots of girls can't attend for reasons including early marriage, pregnancy, etc. So Zoe's obviously talked about girls' clubs, which sounds like a great initiative, and just thinking about other non-formal channels for accessing adolescent learners, that especially to catch the ones who may not be able to continue their formal education.
Thanks, Stephen. Erum.
Yeah, I think the idea that Zoe was talking about about the adolescent, and I think that here what we find also in Bangladesh, that with adolescent, when they are given the responsibility to design their space, I think they do it really. It's really interesting, exciting, because they design it in a way that is actually like it's the beginning of the play journey. And so I was hearing from Ben that about protecting space, but we have this experience that in many of the schools, in the secondary schools, we asked adolescents that would you like to design the space where we can have this the play, and they managed to convince the administration, and they took a little bit of space in the in their school, and they started decorating it, girls and boys together. And this was very, very interesting. And this, I think that this responsibility and this idea that they will be able to design their own space. And I thought that was a great opportunity. And even the girls and boys who sort of seem to be very, very shy and not wanting to kind of really initiate, they also took their role of painting and this. So it was a huge team effort, but this kind of responsibility is really the beginning of also a play journey for them. Just wanted to share that. Thank you.
That's a lovely story. Thank you, Erum. And really kind of centering children's voices again and their perspectives and their agency, letting them kind of co-create spaces where they can play in the way that they want to. We've got quite a few questions about parents and play, the barriers parents might feel to playing with their children or to supporting their children's play in other spaces, and the support parents might need to play. Ben, I know this is something that you've already kind of touched on a little bit, and I wonder if you could give any reflections about the things alongside those parenting programs that you talked about that can be done to support parents so that they can both play with their own children, be more comfortable playing themselves, but also be advocates for their children's play in other settings as well.
I think we need to be able to have a conversation across society that many parents don't feel comfortable playing because they didn't play as kids. I'm a parent. I grew up in an orphanage. I didn't play as a kid. I had to learn to play, and by learning, it's healing, right? And so I think we need to put that knowledge in the hands of all parents, destigmatize it. You know, the whole area of trauma and intergenerational trauma is often stigmatized. There was a great piece by Philippa Perry, who's a parenting expert in the UK, where she wrote about having a group of house guests, and one would always leave when they brought out board games. And it's because he didn't know how to play, but he'd never verbalized it, and he felt ashamed of it because it linked to a neglectful and loveless childhood in which he felt worthless. So we need to be able to break open that conversation and accept that across society, much larger numbers of people than we ever thought before are affected by trauma. It's not a new thing. It's just been hidden in plain sight throughout history. And we just need to be able to open up with parents and say, if you don't feel like playing, it's normal, but when you learn to do it, it's fun. And these are some ways to do it. It needs to be as simple as that. It's not rocket science, just to help you. And it's like attachment in general. The research on the parenting program shows that when parents who had been neglected as children were able to use the skills of parenting to form a better bond with their children, their own mental health improved. We think a major reason for that is love. Love and relationships heal, and play is one of the ways that people learn relationships and love. And so I think we just need to be much more open about that, and and just support parents to work their way through it. It's reversible. It's not insurmountable. We can help every parent that doesn't know how to play learn to play, and the world will be a better place for it.
Thank you, Ben. Do any of the other panelists have reflections on things to support parents to play with their children?
If I can come here,
Yes,
I think with parents, our experience is that of course, there are many people who face trauma, and of course, it is not everybody has played. But with parents, I think when we do the workshops, and when we do parent workshops and material workshops, and when we have things like let's make something that we did when we were children, let's make something that we played with as children. And it's simple things like making glasses with leaves, or something with clay, or and then I think that we find parents, moms and dads and grandparents, everybody enjoy that experience of making something. And that experience of making something, I think, is also something that they then reflect on what they did as children. So I think that experience of making, and very simple materials, but the material workshops, etc., making something for their children or grandchildren, and something that they did in their own childhood, is a very interesting experience. It's an experience of making it for their loved ones, but it's really an experience for them to also remember the kind of experiences they had as children. So I think I think always workshops or craft workshops or material workshops, it's about making very simple things.
Yeah.
And play materials can be very simple.
Thank you. I think there's some learning we can bring from some PEDAL programs as well around supporting parents play. So I'd just like to give those a little bit of a kind of plug as well. So we've got 2 programs in PEDAL that use video feedback to support parents to play. So one called Healthy Start, Happy Start, and another called Playtime with Books, which focuses specifically on book sharing. But both of them give parents kind of tips and guidance on how to play, but also for families where maybe it's a bit more difficult, they can film parent and child playing together and then show the parent that film in a very strengths-based way, pointing out kind of moments of connection, moments where children were really enjoying the play. And that's got a really strong and growing evidence base as a kind of tool. So lots of different approaches as well. Zoe, you talked a bit about earlier about kind of parents' perceptions of play and perhaps not seeing it, not valuing it as a valued part of their children's lives. Can you tell us about the things Right to Play is doing to both support parents to play with their children, but to also to tackle some of those maybe less helpful beliefs and attitudes?
Yeah, so we have a new-ish playful and responsive parenting course called Play to Grow, which we've been testing in Uganda and Tanzania, supported by Lego Foundation. And that's working with parents of 3 to 6 year olds. And it's based on attachment, like strengthening the bonds and relationships between parents and their children, to impact social emotional outcomes for children, but also well-being outcomes for parents themselves. I think in Uganda in particular, so we've piloted the project and we're now extending it in Uganda, and we're working in refugee communities. I think what we see is that parents in those communities are in survival mode, and when you're in that mode, you're just trying to control what you can. And I think play can be seen as something that is kind of like a bit out of control. And so we're encouraging parents to play with their children, make time for play in small ways that are sort of self-contained within the household, that don't require many objects or toys to play with. And what parents are saying is that actually it's making their children's behavior better in some ways. And we didn't set out to kind of correct bad behavior. We don't believe in bad behavior. But as a parent, you know that if your children have been through adverse experiences, they're more likely to act up, less likely to be able to self-regulate. And through Play to Grow, parents are saying that actually their children are kind of easier to parent, which is a great outcome for them, one that they didn't expect to see in engaging in a playful parenting program. The other thing we see is that, again, gender norms and social norms have a massive impact on how parents feel they can or can't play with their children. So we've heard dads say, one dad in particular said he gets weird looks when he's seen playing with his children, because play is seen as something that mums do in households, and that, you know, nurturing your children through play is not seen as manly. So we've started to see that where there are households that have a mum and a dad, and they're demonstrating play in those households and in the community, others are starting to see, oh, okay, maybe there's something in this. So that kind of shift in social norms obviously has a really big impact. And then we also see from children's perspectives themselves, like their gain. So there was a really lovely story of a little girl in Tanzania. I think she was 4 or 5 years old. And she was saying her parents had been enrolled in Play to Grow. She used to wake up in the night and she would be really scared and she couldn't get back to sleep. But she was also scared to go into her parents' room to ask them to help her because she thought she'd get into trouble. And by the end of the program, she said, when I wake up in the night, I can go into my parents' room and tell them I'm scared, and then I get back to sleep. And if you've got children, you know that if they sleep, that's like kind of transformational. So we're seeing all sorts of sort of anticipated outcomes for parents and children, but also these really nice unexpected outcomes as a result of this very short intervention. It's 6 months, it's 24 weeks, led by a parent educator who's from the local community. And so we're going to be further testing it and hoping that we can, as Ben says, we need to scale that if we can prove that it's working really consistently.
Fantastic, a really lovely story there, and an example of that little girl having that safe base actually to be able to go and say, you know, to check in and go back to her parents. So benefits of supporting parents to play with their kids, both for the kids, for the parents, and for the parenting relationship as well. Ben, do you want to come in here? Well, you're on mute, Ben.
Something that Zoe said that was brilliant and just reminded me of a point that we rarely discuss. Zoe was talking about survival mode. We forget that at least in large parts of the world, for most of human history, parenting was about survival, right? And even if you go back and read the kind of nursery rhymes that the grandparent generation had, it's all about don't do this, otherwise you get like a terrible comeuppance. Like, even I think we were watching Charlie in the Chocolate Factory the day on TV, and you know, the Augustus Gloop is going down the tube as a punishment, and the Oompa Loompas are singing about about his comeuppance for bad behavior. This is the way that people used to think about childhood, that we need to protect children from harm, and that's the main purpose of parenting. And it was only in the Enlightenment that I think Rousseau and others began to write about the idea that if we help to nurture children and allow them to explore, they may develop into contributing members of society. That was considered a revolutionary idea in the Enlightenment. So we're part of a historical change, and IDOP is a historical moment in that historical change process.
Thank you. Lovely to place ourselves as part of history, and also to be part of that movement from kind of correcting children to seeing that actually they develop into wonderful beings if we can just give them nurture and opportunities to do that. I was also really interested in that kind of survival mode comment, Zoe, because it reminded me of a fantastic presentation we had at the PEDAL conference last year from the Magpie Project, who work with asylum-seeking refugee families. And they've come in with all these great ideas to do messy play with families, and found actually that these families didn't want to do messy play. Life was chaotic enough already, actually, and they were concerned. And so actually play had to be contained, and those little small moments for people with so much going on in their lives. And I think that kind of message of actually really meeting people where they are and being sensitive and nurturing in our play responses, as well as helping them to be sensitive, nurturing parents too. We have lots and lots and lots of questions, so thank you very much to the audience. We're not going to get through them all, but there's a theme through a few of them around measurement. So people asking, how do we measure play? Are there things that could be shared? You mentioned some of your measurement, so people are asking if you can share that. So I wondered, we'll start with you, Erum, and then open to the wider panel about your just thoughts about how do you measure play and play's impact, and what might our audience learn about that?
Yeah, I think that, of course, the PEDAL team is really an expert here. The measures, I think the way, David had thought about our measures were looking at scales like playfulness scale, looking at, scales like the child for self-regulation. And we also looked at scales like ages and stages for, for children. David also was, always encouraged us to look at scales to look into friendship. So there was a, sort of a few of the measurement tools that we had, incorporated to look into this. But at the same time, David was always encouraging us to look into the particular competencies of the play leaders. And I tell you why. Because the first time around when we did the play labs, I mean, we found that, David asked us to see the interaction, the quality of interaction between play leaders and children. It was fantastic. But then David encouraged us to take another cohort and look specifically, again, observe and look specifically into what the play leader does. That is so fantastic. And so, David also placed a lot of emphasis around interaction and the quality of the interaction. And finally, actually, David and another colleague who's in, Justin Howard, and they both encouraged us to look into how play also improves cultural identities. So these have been a lot of the measurements, but I have to say here that we are currently also working on a measurement, saying Play 2.0, which is funded by Lego. And, there are two, the NYU and RTI are working, they have developed the conceptual, framework for the tools, but it's being tested. And we are working on this for the ages of 0 to 2 and 3 to 5. So I think that in terms of measurement, we also will get, we also look forward to a lot of the sort of insights. Sally.
Thank you, Erum. And we look forward to learning about some of those insights that you're generating as well. Stephen, I know you could probably talk about play research and play measurement for a very long time. We're coming to the end of our talk, but I wondered if you could just share any ideas of kind of measures of play and playfulness and the impact of play, which it might be quite easy for those who aren't academics to pick up and use in their work.
Sure. Well, I'm delighted that Erum has already mentioned the play tool. I guess kind of stepping back slightly from the measurement is thinking about kind of why do you want to measure play? Kind of what purposes is intended to serve? Is it for designing programs and monitoring and evaluating them? Is it for coming up with solutions in the classroom? Or and I guess stepping one step further back from that is thinking about the role of play that you're looking to tap. Is it for learning? Is it for healing? Is it for supporting children through trauma, etc.? So I guess there are loads of different things that one might think about or need to think about before one actually embarks on measuring play. I guess another query as well is the scale at which you're looking to measure the play. So within Pedal, we have lots of colleagues who work on interventions that are quite rigorous and time-consuming in terms of observing interactions between children and parents, looking at aspects of their playfulness, etc. But obviously that takes more time. One might alternatively be looking at a classroom and looking at the teacher's behavior, their playfulness, the playfulness of the children, etc. So I think that it's really important before one embarks on an effort to measure play, to think about some of these underlying reasons for measuring play in the first place.
Thanks. Zoe, I'd really like to hear from you just very quickly about what Right to Play does around measuring play and its impact. I know you again could probably talk for a very long time, but any transferable messages for our audience, and then Ben, we'll come to you to finish off as well.
Yeah, so I think like we're facing the same challenges as everyone else in trying to measure playfulness in different scenarios. We use observation tools with teachers and facilitators. But the one thing I think we are guilty of, along with lots of other organizations, is that we bake play into our programs. We don't bake play into our MEL and our measurement frameworks. And so we're trying to get much better at integrating playful and participatory approaches into the way we monitor, co-design, deliver, and evaluate our programs. And we've done a few pilot projects that develop playful tools with older children and adolescents. I can share learning out after this with people who are interested. But I would just say to everyone, like, don't forget to integrate play into the research end of things. I think it's really easy to kind of just be thinking about your standardized measures and making sure that everything is really robust, and the experience for children is really really not very playful or fun or joyful.
Yeah, brilliant challenge to us. Thanks, Zoe, and links back into those examples that Erum was showing about actually tuning into children's language, which is of play, rather than asking them to interact with us in kind of more adult evaluation methods. Ben, you wanted to say something on this as well.
Yes, UNICEF, obviously one of our roles is to gather population level outcome data at scale and doing comparative across countries to measure policy outcome, the well-being of children. We've just launched a few data points today, global data points, in a policy call that I put in the chat box, panelists, and I think that somebody else could share that for the wider audience. And just to add, with the support of Lego is so prolific in all of this work, and we're all thankful for their support. With the support of Lego, we're designing, and it's a very long technical process, but a brand new module on responsive caregiving, including play, to be included in MIX, the multiple indicator cluster survey. There's a bit of a way to go. We had the meeting in New York with global experts 2 weeks ago. A couple of years of work to do and testing before it's final, but that will be revolutionary for the area of play and the associated areas of attachment and parenting. So we're really excited about that. Thank you.
Very exciting. What a lovely thing to end on. So we've run out of time, I'm afraid. So I'd like to thank Ben, Zoe and Stephen for being fantastic panelists, and most of all, Erum, for a wonderful and thought-provoking lecture. Lovely to see you all, and enjoy the rest of your IDOP. Bye-bye.